So last year, the camera company Hasselblad reached out to me and asked if I would be interested in making a collaboration with them and try one of their medium format cameras. Now, despite I know that these cameras produce insane image quality, I declined the offer, and there were a few reasons for that. So I usually shoot with a Sony a7R5, and a Hasselblad camera like this one here, the X2D, is simply just much heavier, or so I assumed. And the problem with having a heavier camera is that it's of course more annoying to carry up on top of a mountain. On top of that, the lens lineup that you can get for Sony cameras are just massively larger. There is actually only one zoom lens for the X2D, at the very least as I record this video, and the rest are just primes. And if you have followed my channel for a while, you know that I'm not a big fan of primes for landscape photography. As a photographer who also makes videos for YouTube, for me it's also very important that my main camera can film. Right now I'm filming all this on my a7R5, and had I only used this camera, gone out with this camera, I would need to have an extra camera with me to film all sorts of different B-roll. Another reason I declined is that obviously this camera takes high megapixel photos, 100 megapixels to be precise. But those files end up being absolutely massive during post-processing. And especially when I post-process in Photoshop, the PSB or PSD files ends up being very, very big, very, very heavy, very fast. And the trade-off between having all that headache in post-processing versus only shooting with 60 megapixels with my original Sony camera, I don't think it was worth it. Now, another reason is that I completely cannot justify buying a camera like this. It's $15,000 for the lens and camera body combined. This is a finds maker camera, and I'm not sure that the improved image quality over the Sony a7R5 can justify a camera price like that. And finally, me being an educator here on YouTube, it's better and more beneficial for me to actually use a camera that people can relate to. So either a Sony, Nikon or Canon full frame camera. Whereas this here is a very niche camera, and not a whole lot of people can actually buy or afford a camera like this, and even less relate to it. For all those reasons, I decided to decline. Now, admittedly, when they asked again, my curiosity got the better of me, and I was like, okay, let me try it out. So in this video, I'm going to go out and try it out, and then we will talk about those photos and the experience back home in the studio. Now, it is important to say for legal reasons that Hasselblad offered me the camera to keep. I'm under no obligations to be positive or negative about it. I told them I want to be honest with my audience, and they agreed to that. So there we go. This is not a review. This is only my initial thoughts of how I'm using a Hasselblad X2D with a 35 to 75 millimeter lens on it. So I've come over to this beautiful big old mill, as you can see right here, and I've been waiting for the sun to pop out while still having this dark moody background, and it worked. This is a gorgeous composition, and because of the light I have the foreground and the mill lit up, and it really stands out on this really dark, ominous background. Such a nice photo. It's super simple. I'm playing a bit around with the aperture right now so that I throw the foreground field here more or less out of focus, while just focusing with the focus point on the mill. And of course, due to the insane image stabilization there's in this camera, I have so much light, it's no problem just hand holding this shot and just moving a little bit up and down. Beautiful. So I walked a little bit up the road and one of the locals came by and said hi. Hi there. So what I'm doing right now is I'm using the road to lead up to the mill, of course, and then I'm trying some photos where I'm including this shadow here because it helps like outline the mill. And then I'm also going to move a little bit forward like this and make sure that I just keep the mill in there and don't have that shadow there in the foreground. But wow, does this look good. So one thing I really do not like about this photo here is that for some reason they've decided to put one of the old wings right in front of the mill. So you have that in there all the time. There's no way to get rid of it. I can clone it out probably, but it's such an annoying feature of this mill. Compositionally, like, it just takes up so much attention because it's white on a bright background. That's annoying. Anyway, here are some photos you could look at. I think these turned out really, really well. I really like this photo and how it turned out, and if we zoom in we can see it's super sharp. Even though I'm shooting with a 100 megapixel camera, I still feel the need to add some sharpening layers. But I will later in this video show you some comparisons between a couple of photos where I haven't sharpened them. And even though you're shooting with a 100 megapixel camera, you still need to know about light and composition. And if you struggle with composition, be sure to get my 2 ebooks on exactly that topic. They cover all the different compositional tools that I use. The text is minimal, there's loads of examples, so we get to the point fast. In the last chapter, I summarize everything and put everything together that we have learned throughout the ebook. There are links to both ebooks and their free light versions down in the description of this video. So I need to be a bit fast here, but just look at this scene right here. So this is absolutely gorgeous. So I have the light coming from over there. Would have liked to have a tiny bit more light here in the foreground, but I think I can make do right here. Oh, beautiful. I'm basically just trying to find like a composition where I have these dark, ominous clouds here in the background. I'm shooting out at 35mm right now, which is equivalent to 24, 28 or something like that on a full frame camera. Maybe some of the best light I've seen in a very long while. So the light seems to be coming back now. It was just gone for a moment there. And I just want to get a shot of the tree here that's a little bit more wide. And I think I can get it here. So in that way the final photo becomes a little bit more like minimalist. And if you follow my channel here, you know that is something I quite like. I am right now shooting in aperture priority, and I put the exposure compensation up by almost 2 stops, but from what I can see on the back of the screen, I can see cloud structure, so it shouldn't be that bad at all. I should be able to get all the information in there. It looks sharp. It looks really, really nice. Beautiful. Now, no matter how expensive of a camera that you buy, you still need to edit your photos. And if you want to learn how I edit my photos, be sure to enroll in my big Photoshop for Landscape Photographers post-processing course. It is here where I share all my different editing techniques, such as dodging and burning, editing with luminosity masks, blending with luminosity masks, how to clean your photos properly, how to work with atmosphere, how to work with glow, how to add glow, and much, much more. The course even includes 11 start-to-finish tutorials on how to avoid editing mistakes, and I have recently made new updated videos that covers the newest features in both Camera Raw, Lightroom and Photoshop. There's a discount code to get 15% off, that's $45, and a link down in the description of this video. So to answer some of the questions that I started this video with, this here is not as slow to work with as I actually feared it was. Given, yes, obviously, I know my Sony camera, so it is easier to work around in the menus, whereas this has another menu system. But as I mentioned, it doesn't shoot video, so that actually makes the layout of the menu much simpler. On the back of the Sony cameras, there's also this little joystick that is very, very useful for moving the focus point around, whereas the X2D does not have a joystick on the back. So here you will have to activate the focus point and then move it around with the dials on the front and on the back. It's a little bit slower and a little bit more cumbersome, but I won't say it's a deal breaker compared to my Sony camera. And my fear about it being a heavy and big camera was also brought a little bit to shame, because when I compare this camera to my Sony camera, the X2D is actually more or less the same size camera house as the Sony a7R5 or my old Canon 5DS. And when I use the Tamron 50 to 400 millimeter on the Sony, it weighs more or less the same as the X2D with the 35 to 70 millimeter lens. Now, obviously, we are not comparing apples to apples and pears to pears here, because the zoom lenses are different. And this is the only zoom lens that is available for the X2D, at the very least as I record this video. You will have to use primes for all the other different focal lengths. So generally you would have to add more lenses to your lineup than what you would have to do if you're using a Sony system. And even though they are primes and not as heavy, both the price and the weight does add up. Not to mention the practicalities about having to change those lenses all the time. And no, I do totally not buy that you can just crop in because you have 100 megapixels to work with. That is not the reason why you buy a 100 megapixel camera. It's the same as buying a 50mm 1.2 to shoot at f8. You buy a 100 megapixel camera to benefit from the 100 megapixels, not to crop in. So size and weight and practicality is something you need to take into consideration if you want to buy into this system. But it's not as bad as I feared it would be. So another thing I alluded to was that 100 megapixels deliver some very, very large files. And yes, the individual photo files are more than 200 megabytes a piece. So when I develop them in Lightroom or Camera Raw and bring them into Photoshop and only add a few layers to that, the PSB file is already more than 2 gigabytes. It adds up very, very fast, and that can become a problem if you have a slower computer or you don't have enough storage. Take that into consideration too. Now, obviously, the 100 megapixels does deliver high quality photo files. I feel comfortable with these files. It's 16-bit raw files. They are super sharp, obviously because of the lens. There's so much data in them, and you can really push and pull them quite a lot. Now, this camera here is still a camera. It's still bound by the physics that we have here on Earth. It's not a miracle maker, but they are some quite flexible and great files to work with. And you just get really good quality. I feel comfortable with these files and photographing with this camera. That said, if we compare a file from my A7R5 to the X2D, you can see here on the screen, this is the difference. So the upper file here is my Sony A7R5, 60 megapixels. Remember, this is 60 megapixels compared to 100 megapixels right here. And as you can see, this is somewhat the same scene at somewhat the same equivalent focal length. Now, it is a little bit hard to compare these one to one, but if I make them the same size and zoom in, so now I've made the two files somewhat the same size. And if you can see when I zoom in to the lighthouse, there is definitely a visible difference. So this here is the A7R5 file with the Tamron 28 to 200 millimeter versus the X2D with the 35 to 75 millimeter. As expected, the 100 megapixel file is much sharper. But are they really that much sharper? The big photo here behind me is only 42 megapixels, and I have no problem seeing all the details there. And when we zoom into this and you can see the difference here, you have to remember how big part of this photo are we actually seeing when we zoom out. It's an absolutely minuscule part of the photo. It's equivalent to something like this up here, of this big print here. And this is where both print quality and viewing distance comes in when you have to take into consideration, do you actually need this much sharpness in your photos? Personally, I would say you probably do not. Is it nice to have? I guess so. Is it necessary to have? Absolutely not. Another issue I raised was that me as a YouTube content video creator teacher would have a problem with you guys out there. If I was running around with such an expensive camera, a lot of beginners would think, oh, he's taking these good photos because he has a great camera. We all know that to be complete bullshit. But the fact of the matter is that you guys probably cannot relate as much to my work unless I use a camera that more people have, or a camera system that more people have, like the Sony full frame system or the Canon full frame system or the Nikon full frame system. But I'm actually more curious to hear from you. Would that be an issue for you? And finally, price. Right now, a Hasselblad X2D is more than twice as expensive as a Sony A7R5. On top of that, you have to add the lenses. And the lenses for the X2D are somewhat between twice as expensive, 3 times as expensive, depending, of course, on what quality lens you're buying. If you're buying third-party lenses, if you are buying native lenses, and so forth. But all this pricing needs to be taken into consideration when you choose your camera system. Personally, although I would say that the X2D is an absolutely amazing camera, I'm really genuinely surprised about how great of a camera it is. It doesn't sound like this based on the critique I've just given, but it is a great camera. But is it worth that much more compared to an A7R5? I would say no, but I really like it and I enjoy photographing with it. Now, one thing I actually also found to be quite surprising is that the ergonomics of the X2D is actually quite nice. It's comfortable to hold. Now, obviously, it's not like Sony is the paragon of ergonomics. So in that way, each time I get a Canon or a Nikon camera into my hands, they feel so much more comfortable than the Sony cameras. But that's the thing with the X2D. It's just an really, really well-made camera. It feels comfortable to hold. The thing is, this Hasselblad X2D just oozes quality as expected for the price tag. If you struggle with composition, be sure to get my 2 ebooks. If you want to learn even more about editing, be sure to enroll in my post-processing course and remember to use the coupon code. Let me know down in the comments of this video if a Hasselblad X2D is on your wish list. So these are my initial thoughts. The question is, am I going to sell it or am I going to keep it just a little bit longer?